The sound came first, sharp and metallic, cutting through the smoke of Europe like a signature of death. German soldiers learned to recognize it not by sight, but by instinct, the unmistakable rhythm of American fire advancing through hedgerows and ruins. By the time they understood what it meant, the M1 Garand was already claiming ground, men, and momentum. War does not fear courage, but it respects efficiency, and the Garand embodied both in steel and walnut. It was not merely a rifle carried by American soldiers, but a force multiplier that altered how battles unfolded minute by minute. To the men facing it, the weapon became a symbol of imbalance, of a war slipping beyond familiar rules. Before the first shot was fired in Europe, the rifle was born out of frustration and foresight in a nation unwilling to repeat the stagnation of the last war. American ordnance officers understood that bolt-action rifles had limits measured in seconds, and seconds were paid for in blood. The solution was radical for its time: a semi-automatic service rifle designed not for precision alone, but for sustained dominance. John C. Garand did not design a legend, but he engineered inevitability through relentless refinement and quiet obsession. Years of testing, rejection, and redesign hardened the rifle long before it ever reached a battlefield. When it was finally adopted, it carried with it the weight of American industrial will and doctrinal evolution. Training with the Garand was not simply about marksmanship, but about rhythm, aggression, and confidence. Soldiers learned to fire, reload, and advance as a single continuous motion, reinforcing speed as doctrine rather than exception. This conditioning transformed infantrymen from reactive defenders into forward-driving instruments of pressure. Across the Atlantic, German doctrine still trusted precision and discipline above volume and tempo. The Kar 98K was accurate, reliable, and deadly in trained hands, but it demanded pauses that the Garand did not. Each bolt cycle was a breath, and in combat against Americans, those breaths became liabilities. Deployment of the Garand coincided with a shift in how American units maneuvered under fire. Fire teams could suppress while advancing without waiting for reload cycles to complete. This constant pressure forced German units to break contact earlier, reposition faster, and expend manpower simply to survive. In Normandy's hedgerows, the difference became brutally clear. American riflemen could fire 8 aimed shots without breaking stance, while German soldiers worked steel bolts under stress and fear. The battlefield rewarded the side that could maintain momentum, and the Garand made momentum habitual. German after-action reports began to reference American firepower with unusual candor. Officers noted not just casualties, but psychological degradation under sustained semi-automatic fire. The rifle was no longer perceived as equipment, but as a tactical imbalance impossible to ignore. Combat stress compounded this hatred, turning sound into terror and tempo into trauma. The distinct metallic ping of the Garand's en-bloc clip ejecting was mythologized as a warning of vulnerability, yet in reality it marked the arrival of the next rifleman already firing. Fear filled the gaps that doctrine could not. American command pressure amplified the rifle's effect, pushing units to exploit its strengths relentlessly. Orders emphasized aggression, rapid movement, and overwhelming presence at the point of contact. The Garand did not replace leadership, but it rewarded decisive command with immediate battlefield results. Brotherhood formed around the weapon as much as around shared hardship. Soldiers trusted the rifle to function in mud, snow, and chaos, and that trust translated into confidence in one another. When men believe their tools will not fail, they fight harder for those beside them. Loss followed inevitably, and the Garand became both shield and witness. It was carried past fallen friends, fired in rage and grief, and leaned against crosses carved from ration crates. The rifle absorbed the emotional weight of a war that asked everything and returned scars. German soldiers came to hate the Garand not only because it killed efficiently, but because it exposed vulnerability. It highlighted the limits of tradition when faced with adaptation. The weapon did not insult them with superiority, it overwhelmed them with reality. As battles intensified, German units attempted to adapt tactics rather than technology. Machine guns were repositioned forward, ambushes tightened, and fields of fire narrowed in desperate attempts to blunt American momentum. Yet every adjustment assumed pauses in enemy fire that no longer existed. The Garand compressed time on the battlefield, forcing decisions faster than doctrine allowed. German soldiers found themselves reacting instead of controlling engagement distance, their traditional advantages eroded by relentless American advance. War favors those who dictate tempo, and tempo had shifted decisively. In urban combat, the rifle's impact became even more pronounced. Room clearing demanded immediate follow-up shots, and the Garand delivered without hesitation. Each stairwell and hallway became a killing zone where speed outweighed precision. American infantry squads learned to exploit this advantage instinctively. One rifle fired, another followed, and the pressure never lifted. German defenders faced not individual shooters, but a continuous wall of controlled aggression. Commanders on both sides felt the strain differently. American officers could plan offensively with confidence that firepower would support maneuver. German officers increasingly planned for withdrawal before contact was even fully established. This imbalance fed resentment as much as fear. German soldiers had trained for years under doctrines emphasizing marksmanship and patience, only to be overwhelmed by volume and immediacy. The Garand did not negate skill, but it punished hesitation. Captured German troops spoke of American rifles with bitterness rather than technical critique. They described fights where suppression never ceased and opportunities vanished instantly. The hatred was emotional, born from helplessness rather than misunderstanding. Contrary to myth, the famous ping did not invite counterattack. In real combat, the sound was drowned by gunfire, explosions, and shouted commands. German soldiers rarely survived long enough in close contact to exploit theoretical weaknesses. Logistics widened the gap further. American manufacturing ensured replacement rifles, parts, and ammunition arrived relentlessly. German units rationed fire while Americans dictated engagement length. Brotherhood among American soldiers hardened under this advantage. Confidence in the Garand strengthened cohesion, as men trusted their squad mates to maintain fire when it mattered most. That trust translated into forward movement under conditions that once stalled entire armies. Loss, however, remained universal. The rifle did not grant immunity, only probability. Each fallen American was a reminder that superiority reduced risk, but never erased sacrifice. German hatred sharpened as the war dragged on. The Garand came to represent not just American firepower, but American inevitability. It symbolized a conflict no longer decided by bravery alone, but by systems engineered for dominance. By late war, German attempts to field semi-automatic rifles arrived too late and in too few numbers. Industrial collapse and strategic overreach rendered adaptation impossible. The battlefield had already delivered its verdict. As German morale eroded, the rifle became a psychological marker of defeat long before surrender papers were signed. The sound of American fire signaled not just contact, but inevitability. Soldiers learned to associate it with battles that could not be won, only survived. Internal German reports grew more critical as reality replaced ideology. Officers acknowledged that American infantry firepower allowed smaller units to seize and hold ground rapidly. The Garand forced confrontations on unfavorable terms again and again. Training deficiencies were exposed under sustained pressure. German infantry were disciplined and capable, but their methods assumed time that no longer existed. The Garand stripped seconds from decision-making, and seconds determined life or death. Combat exhaustion deepened this resentment. Continuous American pressure denied defenders recovery between engagements. Fatigue accumulated faster than replacements could arrive. American command exploited this degradation with methodical precision. Attacks were timed to maintain contact rather than achieve dramatic breakthroughs. The goal was not annihilation, but erosion. Brotherhood among German soldiers tightened even as hope diminished. They fought for each other rather than victory, holding positions long enough to buy time. Against the Garand, even time became a scarce commodity. Controversy emerged quietly within German ranks. Some questioned whether doctrine had failed them, or whether technology had rendered tradition obsolete. The rifle became a symbol of a war, evolving faster than beliefs. American soldiers rarely reflected on the weapon's broader implications during combat. To them, it was a tool that worked when others failed. Only later would its role be understood as transformational rather than incidental. Loss accumulated on both sides, but asymmetrically. German casualties mounted faster under constant pressure. The Garand did not cause defeat alone, but it accelerated its arrival. As Allied forces advanced deeper into Europe, the rifle's reputation preceded them. German defenders braced for sustained engagement rather than brief clashes. Anticipation itself became a form of stress. By war's end, hatred gave way to recognition. German veterans acknowledged the rifle's decisive influence, even as they remembered the fear it inspired. Respect replaced resentment in the cold distance of peace. The legacy of the Garand extended beyond victory parades and historical praise. It reshaped infantry doctrine worldwide and redefined expectations of individual soldiers. Modern warfare absorbed its lessons permanently. When the war ended, silence replaced the rifle's echo across Europe. Ruins stood where doctrine had failed and adaptation had arrived too late. In that silence, the Garand's influence became impossible to deny. Post-war German analysis stripped emotion from memory and examined cause and effect. Reports acknowledged that American infantry firepower reshaped engagements at the lowest tactical level. The Garand was cited not as a curiosity, but as a decisive enabler of momentum. American veterans returned home carrying the same rifles that had carried them through hell. For many, the weapon symbolized survival rather than superiority. It was remembered as dependable, unyielding, and present when everything else collapsed. Controversy followed in academic and military circles. Critics debated whether firepower had replaced skill or merely amplified it. The Garand became central to discussions about the ethics and mechanics of modern warfare. Military doctrine worldwide absorbed its lesson quietly and permanently. Semi-automatic service rifles became expectation rather than innovation. Infantry combat would never again be built around hesitation. Brotherhood endured long after uniforms were folded away. Veterans on opposing sides shared memories shaped by the same relentless tempo. The rifle linked them through loss, fear, and irreversible change. The hatred German soldiers felt was not rooted in envy or myth. It came from recognition that the battlefield itself had evolved beneath their feet. The Garand exposed the cost of failing to adapt. Legacy is often softened by time, but this one remained sharp. Museums displayed the rifle as engineering triumph, while graves marked its consequence. Steel and walnut outlived flesh and belief alike. The M1 Garand did not win the war alone, but it taught the world how wars would be won from then on. And for the men who faced it across shattered fields and burning cities, it was not just a weapon, but the sound of history moving forward without them.